Hello nerds, it's that time of the month. We do this once a month, every month, and that's a post designed around comic shop recommendations, new #1 comics for you to discover. Now, if you're like me, you like getting in on the ground floor of comic runs. It's hard for me to just jump in midstream and try to play catch up. It's too much work in a lot of cases, especially if the franchise has been around for a while. So every month we like to pause and just give you two #1 issues that if you walked into your local comic shop today, you would easily find on the shelf and be able to get in right from the beginning on some potentially awesome runs. Well, let's get right to this month's first title, and it's going to be a new Dungeons & Dragons title from IDW called Frost Giant's Fury. Now, we here at Nerds on Earth absolutely love it when our favorite franchises cross streams. Last week, I wrote a post on Pathfinder's Goblins series of comics and how much I love them. You'll find a link to that in the description, and this title gave me a lot of the same feels. Now, we're introduced to a party of 5 adventurers: Minsk, a ranger with his pet miniature giant space hamster Boo, that's a mouthful, a sorceress named Delina, a currently unconscious cleric named Nares, and 2 rogues named Krydel and Shandy. Now, Zub, the writer, authored a bit of an introduction, says you don't have to know how they got where they are, you don't have to have read the previous 2 titles, namely Legends of Baldur's Gate and Shadows of the Vampire, to jump right into Frost Giant's Fury, feel right at home within its pages. But these adventurers find themselves on or near the spine of the world without any winter gear, pretty precarious position to be in. They wisely decide to prioritize shelter, which they stumble into, literally, they fall through a hole in the ice into a cave, begin a fire to try to chase some of the frost from their bones. However, a wandering party of ogres who is returning from a successful hunt rolls a pretty high perception check. They spot that light and a battle ensues. Now, the battle was pretty fierce, with neither group seeming to have the obvious advantage or upper hand until an arrow drops one of the ogres, squaring off against one of the rogues, Krydel. He thanks Shandy, the other rogue, but she doesn't claim the kill at all. Instead, there is a new player on the field, a dragonborn ranger named Sarvin. He turns the tide of the fight and invites the venturers to follow him to Fireshear, where they'll find healing, warmth, and food. But meanwhile, and elsewhere, a long ship full of frost giants makes its way through a choppy bay, and their leader, Lord Grimmort, announces the plan to his crew. And the plan goes like this: go ashore in Fireshear, of course, clear it out, and then make their way to, quote-unquote, the big prize. Now, as somebody who plays Dungeons & Dragons with relative frequency, I couldn't help but have fun imagining the actual roll of the dice when things like the ogres perceiving the cave roll a perception check, or when Minsk makes and misses his first attack. And that added a pretty significant degree of fun to the experience. Theater of the mind aside, I think Zub does a pretty great job fleshing out certain party dynamics and internal conflicts. He plays the characters pretty well, particularly Minsk, who finds himself kind of in the midst of an existential crisis because he believes he's this tool of great good, and recently they were defeated by or had to flee from Strahd in the prior 6-issue miniseries. And Diaz's art makes the theater of the mind really a solid plan B. It's sharp, it's detailed, it's really neatly expressive. When Sarvin comes on the scene, there's a tendril of smoke rising from one of his nostrils, and he just looks frightening. My first thought was, if I ever play a Dragonborn Ranger, I'm using this here image as my character picture, no doubt. Also, as a bonus, you are given Minsk character sheet at the back of the book, so you're gifted a 6th-level Ranger's complete sheet for cover price, ready to play. That all by itself is a pretty good deal. But even if you're not big into the tabletop RPG experience, this comic is very quickly paced, it's action-packed, and ends with the promise of more of the same. I'm not too terribly interested in the adventurers' downtime in Fireshear, and I suspect that the second issue will have the Frost Giants arrive on the scene relatively quickly, perhaps after a bit more role-playing to further flesh out the party, but not very much. Our second title of the month is actually a crossover event with DC Comics and Boom Studios, and that's going to be the Justice League of America and Power Rangers crossover event. This comic opens up with a sepia-toned cityscape of Angel Grove, which is the home of the Power Rangers, only when you turn the page, you're treated to a crater and a box announcing that Angel Grove is gone. And Zack, the Black Ranger, believes it's his fault, despite the fact Superman's trying to convince him otherwise. Jump back in time 36 hours and we find ourselves in the command center of the Power Rangers, and Zordon is rounding them up because Alpha 5, the plucky sentient robot, has gone missing. He left to do a routine check of the perimeter defenses and never came back. Zack ends up finding him in short order and teleports Alpha back into the command center, and Zordon almost immediately realizes that something is really wrong, tries to get Zack to teleport him out. Doesn't happen in time. Big explosion. Turns out Alpha was a bomb. And in walks Lord Zed and about a handful, about half dozen putties. Now by this point, Zack is injured. He's way outnumbered. He's way outmatched, but he does what he can. He grabs Zed and tries to teleport out of there. But there was some damage done to the teleporter system, and he ends up in another world, according to Zordon, which is what he tells the other Rangers when they do finally arrive on scene. And in that new world, we come upon Zack fighting off a couple of the putties. And then eventually Batman comes on the scene, and he calmly tries to convince Zack to disarm himself, to put the axe down. Zack believes, though, that Batman is one of Lord Zed's monsters. So he attacks Batman. Batman quickly disarms and disables the Black Ranger, pinning him to the ground just in time for the other 5 Rangers to explode onto the scene. They understandably misinterpret what they see, and they lay into Batman as well, who calls for help against quote-unquote enhanced beings with increased durability, speed, and strength. Batman asks his backup where his backup is at, and the response he gets is Illinois, and now Ohio, in closing. The Flash whisks by and disarms all 6 Rangers in, well, a flash. And then Batman, no joke, tries to blow up the Power Rangers with a missile from the Batmobile. Kimberly, the Pink Ranger, calls in her pterodactyl Dinozord, which scoops up the Batmobile in its beak and takes flight, leaving it to the Flash to tell Cyborg and the Justice League Watchtower that Batman has been taken by a flying pink dinosaur robot. Now, I'd be lying if I said that my selection of this title had anything whatsoever to do with the Justice League. It was 100% Power Rangers nostalgia fueled. I mean, just look at this variant cover, the Green Ranger fighting Superman. Please, just take my money, all of the money. And the comic turned out to be surprisingly fun to boot, so much so that I'm now have queued up Boom Studios' ongoing Power Rangers comic. If it's anything like what I read in this issue, it'll be worth reading for sure. And I'll be honest with you guys as well, I'm going to ride this one out primarily because I really want to see the Justice League fight the Megazord. It may never happen, heck, it probably won't happen, but a nerd can dream. As crossovers are apt to go, the misunderstanding between the two groups of hero will get ironed out as soon as Zed rears his ugly head in this new world. But even then, if the comics hold true to the faithful formula of the old television show, Zed or some minion of his will get supersized, the Rangers will call their Zords, they'll form the Megazord, and maybe we'll get to see a veritable Royal Rumble between a giant monster, the Megazord, and the entirety of the Justice League. I'm in. I mean, I'd be in just for that. But the writing is solid, the art is stellar. I think they pulled some particularly neat visual tricks with the way the Rangers morphed and the Flash later stealing their weapons. In one panel, they're holding them, and then in the next, they're not, without any of the Rangers having moved an inch. The weapons are gone. I thought that was a neat effect that really lent itself even to some visual comedy. So there you have it, 2 #1 issues waiting for you to buy it, whether the analog, paper form over at your local comic shop or digitally through Comixology or however it is you may be buying those. Can't wait to do this again next month. We'll have to see what the next 30 days brings us as far as comics are concerned. But for now, later nerds.